All right, I think we'll get started. I wish everybody a good afternoon and welcome. It's really fun to see a lot of familiar faces on the screen. I'm Tom Schreier, and I'm pleased to be the director of this Inspiring Conversations series and also the founding director of the Inspired Leadership Initiative here at Notre Dame. It's our program, as many of you know, for those who haven't completed their chosen career and look to return to campus for an academic year to discover, discern, and design their next act. I want to sincerely thank you for participating in this, which is the final installment this semester, where we have been discussing leading people in an ever-changing world. We're truly grateful for the amount of interest in this program, as we have over 1,000 subscribers ranging from our ILI fellows to Notre Dame alumni to faculty, students, and friends who have registered to join us over the course of this semester. We're also excited to share that our community now has over 26 countries from around the world represented. As we all know, we've designed today's conversation to have as much engagement as possible, facilitated by having a live Q&A session later. Before we start, I want to thank once again all of you who've worked so hard to make this possible. I'd like to particularly thank the Alumni Association for all the thought and work they've put into this platform, ThinkND, which is Notre Dame's online learning community. This week, we're honored to welcome to the session Richard Leider, who I have had the pleasure of knowing and working with for the past few years. Richard Leider is the founder of Inventure, which is the purpose company, where the mission is to help people unlock the power of purpose. Along the way, Richard has written 10 books, including 3 bestsellers, which have sold over 1 million copies. The Power of Purpose and Repacking Your Bags are considered classics in the personal growth field. Emerging shortly will be Richard's next book, which you'll have an opportunity, hopefully, to tell you about during the course of his presentation. Richard is widely viewed as a pioneer in the global purpose movement. His work has been featured in many media sources, and his PBS special, The Power of Purpose, was viewed by millions of people. He has taken his purpose message to all 50 states and 4 continents, and has advised everyone from the AARP to the National Football League and our own US State Department. He is ranked by Forbes as one of the top 5 most respected coaches. And he has also recently joined the Notre Dame faculty as a senior fellow in the Notre Dame Institute for Advanced Studies, where he works closely with us on the Inspired Leadership Initiative and also our last speaker, Father Dan Grudy. It is a pleasure and it's a privilege to welcome Richard Leider to Conversations. Richard, the stage is yours.
So thank you so much. The privilege is all mine. And my relationship, thanks to you, bringing me into Notre Dame and into the Institute for Advanced Study has really been a highlight for me. In spite of the pandemic, I got there once, and I hope to get there many more times, but at least I got there to start with, really on campus, which was thrilling. So today, the title of this is The Path to Purposeful Leadership. You could call it the path to purposeful life, because the ultimate leadership challenge really is self-leadership. We're all self-leaders in certain ways. The problem is that most of us, all of us probably, didn't really get the leadership guide, the instruction guide early in life. We had to figure it out along the way. So I've been studying this path, this purposeful path now for over 4 decades. And today what I'd like to do is to share with you 3 things I know for sure, 3 sure signs of purpose. And also share with you a default purpose, because people say, well, what if you don't have a purpose? Well, within the next hour you will, because I'm going to share a default one, and at least you can use that if you choose to. One thing I want to say, and then we'll launch into lessons learned, is that purpose is not a luxury for the wealthy or the educated or for the few. Purpose is fundamental. And that's the biggest insight that I can share with you is that purpose is fundamental to health, to healing, to happiness, and even to longevity. The research today shows that people who have a reason to get up in the morning, a why, a reason to get up, tend to live 7 to 10 years longer. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I just want to say that purpose is universal, it's fundamental, and it's enduring. It goes from cradle to grave. So the global purpose movement that I said I've been doing this for 4 decades. So a global purpose movement is afoot out there in the world. And let's take a look at that globe, that next slide. That actually I've had the privilege of being on almost every continent and looking at purpose from a lens of many, many different angles. And today, business schools, healthcare organizations like the Mayo Clinic and Duke and Cleveland and many, many others, integrated medicine, so to speak, all say that purpose is part of the fundamental part of our lives, in addition to health and money. I always say there's 3 M's. Money, we need enough. Medicine is key for health, and meaning. So the 3 M's are part of the global purpose movement. We of course need money, resources. We of course need health, but also we need meaning. We need a reason to get up in the morning in order to live a full and integrated life. And so the philosopher Schopenhauer said that every new idea goes through 3 stages. The first stage is ridicule. So early in my path, people said, purpose, get a life, I need money, I need this or that. And eventually, though, we find that meaning is really fundamental. The second thing in a new idea is pushback, often violent opposition. Integrated health, for example, it wasn't easily or early adopters putting purpose in the center of integrated medicine. That took time, that took experience, but now it's there. And the third step, so we've got ridicule and violent or strong opposition. And the third stage is self-evident. And what I found now is purpose is in the zeitgeist. It's really self-evident. Business schools teach purpose as part of leadership, healthcare organizations, aging, schools. It seems to be everywhere now. So one of the things that I think is important here is that science and faith agree that purpose is fundamental. And so when I was doing the PBS special that Tom generously in my bio mentioned, I got a chance to go out to neuroscience labs across the country to really take a look at purpose in the brain, purpose in health. And a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins held up this pill. And he said to me, Richard, you see this pill? Would you buy it? And I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, this pill will reduce the effects of dementia and Alzheimer's significantly, will reduce the incidence of macroscopic stroke by 41%, will help with sleep apnea and other disorders, and a bonus will add 7 years to your life. Would you buy it? And I went, well, of course, who wouldn't? But how much does it cost? And he looked at me and smiled and he said, well, Richard, it's free. Purpose is what we're talking about here. We now are able to measure purpose in the brain. When people have a reason to get up in the morning, a why, and they execute that or activate that rather on a day-to-day basis, there are things that happen in the wiring of the brain that we can actually measure now. And so science and faith agree that we don't know whether we're born with purpose or whether we acquire it. I happen to believe it's both. I think if you have a pulse, you have a purpose. You have a reason for being here. And so, and that reason is to make a difference in the world. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So let me give you the default purpose. Let me give you the pill right now. Here's the pill. Jot it down. Grow and give. That's it. If you get up in the morning and you grow and give, each day you will be living purposefully. Whether you have a purpose that you can name beyond that, that is what we've learned is the heart and soul of living a purposeful life, is growing and giving from early to later in life. And so let's look at the question, what is purpose? Why? It's the answer to the question, why? Why do I get up in the morning? And there's a American essayist, E.B. White, who wrote this, which is one of my favorite quotes about purpose. He said this, I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. Well, you might chuckle, but with all due respect to E.B. White, it makes it easier to plan the day because a good life is a life of both saving and savoring. Not literally saving the world, but bringing our best to the world to make a difference, to make our dent in the universe. I have a colleague who has an answering machine on his phone that when you listen to the message, it says this, at the sound of the tone, please leave your answer to life's two eternal questions. Who are you and what do you want? Well, that's pretty clever, but basically that's the bottom line of purpose in many ways, to belong. Who are you and what do you want? And what I find that people really want is to belong and to matter, to be part of community, to be part of tribe, to be part of family, to belong and to matter to that community. So purpose is the answer to the question, why? Why do I get up in the morning? As I said, and it's fundamental. It's our ultimate concern. You've all had teachers. One of my core teachers along the way, and I've had many, and I plan to have more, and some of them I planned, like Father Dan Grudy and Tom and others at Notre Dame, to learn from. But way back in the 60s, I learned that purpose is a choice. And I learned it from Viktor Frankl. I got out of graduate school in counseling psychology, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. You'd probably try to figure that out maybe in counseling, but the fact is, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I had studied Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, which the Library of Congress says is one of the 25 most important books in American history that have influenced American thought. Viktor Frankl, I had studied, was giving a seminar in San Diego, and I went there. I didn't have two nickels to rub together, but I rubbed together what I did have, and I spent 5 days, and it changed my life forever. Many of you probably have read or heard at least of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is really about purpose and purpose as a choice. And Frankl said that between stimulus and response is our freedom. It's our freedom to choose. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Frankl was in 3 Nazi concentration camps, as was his whole family, his grandparents, his parents, his siblings, and his pregnant wife, Tilly, all perished. They were all killed. He was the only one who survived. He weighed 97 pounds when he was liberated from Auschwitz, and he went back to Vienna, where he had come from. And in Vienna, he was a neurologist and a psychiatrist, really studying what he called logotherapy, meaning therapy, purpose. And after he healed and did some thinking and reflecting, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days. And this is to me, the core of it, that purpose is a choice. In the concentration camp, do you have a choice? Well, you can give somebody else a kind word, a crust of bread, a slurp of soup, a hug, hope for the future. The paradox of purpose is this: it has to start with a choice on the inside, but it's manifested by an action on the outside where we reach out to make a difference. Purpose is a choice and it's a verb. It's an act. And so Frankl said this, which I think is really important. He said, don't ask what my purpose is. He said, or what is the meaning of my life? Ask this, what is life asking of me right now in this set of circumstances? What is life asking of you today in this pandemic, for example? And so we all have crucibles, and the pandemic is certainly a huge crucible, but we have choices in how we, even though we can't control what is happening out there, we can control somewhat what is happening in here and who we bring to the situation. So purpose is a choice, but purpose is also an aim. And so I've been interviewing people since the 60s, actually, and writing these books. I have a new book coming out next year called Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old? You know, the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like many people are asking on the Notre Dame campus. Well, the ILI folks are asking, who do you want to be when you grow old? And what are my choices? And what are my possibilities? And that's why I'm so excited to be involved with Tom and Chris Stevens and others as part of this action. The purpose is an aim. And I've interviewed older adults now for many years and written about it. And they've said three things if they could live their life over. As I've written this book and I've asked them, if you could live your life over, what was the wisdom? What did you gain that you could share and that I can pass on to others? And because, you know, I listen for a living. I'm a coach and a writer, et cetera. And I listened for a living. And they said these three things. Number one, if I could live my life over, I would be more reflective the second time around. Meaning I would step back like we are this hour and kind of take a look at the big picture and look at the choices that I made and what maybe some regrets, but also what are my future choices. Second, they said if they could live their life over, they would take more risks the second time around. And the risks were in two areas, not financial, not physical. They had to do more with work and love. We spend 60% of our life's most precious currency, time, working. And so they wish they would have figured out a better fit at any point in life, midlife, but certainly earlier in life. And secondly, relationships. I was part of the Harvard study of adult development, the longest standing study of adults in the world. It's been around since 1915. And what I found was this, or what they found was this, that relationships are the bottom line, full stop, to a fulfilling, purposeful life. And I found, and they found that to belong and to matter, as we said earlier, are fundamental to a purposeful life. And the third thing, so we have, I wish I would have been more reflective. I wish I would have taken more risks in the area of work and relationships to be a better person in so many ways in the relational realm. And the third thing was every single person wants their life to matter. Mattering matters from early in life all the way to the end. We tend to go through three stages of purpose. The first stage is me. It's about me. I need to learn about me. The second stage, and that's essential. You need to grow, you need to be self-aware. Second stage of purpose is we. All of a sudden, we start to realize that it's really not just about me, it's about we. I belong, I'm in community and with peers, et cetera. And that's a maturation that hopefully happens, but not everybody. There are people who are still stuck in me. And then the third is us. It's about all of us, not just me, not just about we, but about us, about all of us. And the great religious leaders, Jesus, our great teachers throughout history, it's about all of us. It's about us. And they have seen the larger picture, obviously, and have seen that it's not just about me or we, it's about all of us coming together in a purposeful life in a purposeful way. So let's quickly talk about the three signs of purpose. How can I be sure? As a coach, people say, yeah, this is great, Richard, but I'm busy and, I don't have a lot of time. I call it the Got a Minute School of Coaching. Got a minute? Can you tell me what I should do with the rest of my life? And I said, well, there's three sure signs of purpose. Let's quickly look at these three signs of purpose. Keep in mind here that every one of you is an experiment of one. Even though purpose is universal, fundamental, and enduring, everybody is their own experiment in terms of how they're going to activate purpose. Purpose is a verb, and how it's activated is, as I said, we're all an experiment of one. So sign number one, sure sign number one, is the answer to the question, how do I want to help? What are my gifts, basically? When I was early in my career, I was in the what used to be called personnel, but it was actually now called HR, or human resources. But I had a very large job in what is now U.S. Bank, and used to be called First Bank in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But I had a side hustle. That's what they call it today. I don't know what they called it then. My side hustle was a job that I did that I really loved, and that was something called Lunch Hour Limited. Lunch Hour Limited was, you buy me lunch, I coach you. I was a coach, I was a counselor, but my day job was as a HR administrative type. And but my real calling, if you will, was really, my real gift was in terms of coaching and what I now call unlocking purpose in others. So Lunch Hour Limited, I had a booming Lunch Hour Limited side hustle. And in fact, I had a waiting list. And my boss, the CEO of the bank, didn't think it was such a great idea, but I went forward with it. And I had great success. I had 80% of the people that I coached quit. That's why he didn't think it was such a good idea. And to be honest with you, they didn't all quit. What they did is they went back and talked to their supervisor about how they could bring their gifts, passions, and values forward, either in that job or another job in the bank. And about 15% actually did move on elsewhere. But some people had a job, some people had a career, but what they yearned for was a calling. They wanted something that really fit who they were at the deepest level. So I would then give them the napkin test. So the next slide here says follow the flow. And here's the napkin test. Let's take it. Are you using your gifts on things you feel passionate about in an environment that fits your values? That's a calling. And calling is another word actually for purpose. It's a vocational word for purpose. But gifts are the things that God gave us to share with the world. When I ask people how many of you have brothers and sisters, raise your hand. Almost everybody raises their hand, or if not, they have siblings or they have cousins or whatever. Said, are their gifts the same as yours? And they all say, they smile and say, no, of course not. They're all different. Well, when did you start to notice? Oh, real early in life. A gift has these four characteristics. Number one, a gift is something you love to do. You really enjoy doing. Secondly, others observe you enjoying it and probably doing it effortlessly. And third, you can't recall learning it. It's been with you so long, your hand just turns to it naturally. And fourth, you love learning more about it and hanging around with other people who have the similar gifts and want to learn more about it. So I would take people through the napkin test, and that's what we're doing on the Notre Dame campus with both freshmen and returnees, the ILI folks, to follow the flow. The flow is when you're in the zone. In the zone, you find yourself, whether you're working at a job or whether you're doing something avocationally or volunteering or in your own family and community, are you using your gifts on things you really care about in an environment that fits your values? And that's the formula for purpose that I have simply studied for all these years. So heed the call. You know, you've heard of the concept of a calling card. Well, on the front of the calling card, it usually says, and my calling card is I have it in my hand here. has how to get a hold of me and kind of my title. But the key is what's on the back of your card. What would you today put on the back of your card? Mine says, unlock the power of purpose. That's not just a brand thing or a thing that this is what I care about. This is what I bring my gifts to. This is what I wake up to in the morning and feel strongly about. One of the most dangerous questions is, what do you do? Because you're not what you do. There's an old adage that says, if you are what you do, when you don't, you aren't. And often people who are in transition, who don't, aren't, and it has a huge impact on their life, not only their livelihood, but their life and their health, etc. And same when people retire. If you are what you do and then you retire and you don't, now who are you? So we need to pay attention to what's on the back of the card, not just what's on the front of the card. So quickly, let's look at the next sign. Sign number 2. Who do I want to help? Who do I want to help? What do I really care about? What are my passions, so to speak? A book came out 44 years ago. 44 years ago, a book called Passages. You probably heard of it, or maybe some of you were influenced by it, but it stayed around on the bestseller list for years because it helped people figure out what they want to do and who do they want to help and how do they want to live. How shall I live? What do I really care about? So what we're talking about here is, what do you care about? What are your passions about? What are you curious about? The next slide shows curiosity with a question mark. I was on a program a while back, and I was backstage in the green room before going out on stage. And I was sitting in the green room with the founder of TED. See the button there for TED. And his name is Richard Saul Warman. And he's the founder of TED. And he sold TED, but he founded it back in the 80s. And his name, so Richard said, well, what are you going to talk about? And I said, purpose. And he's kind of shook his head. And I said, well, Richard, what are you going to talk about? And he said, curiosity. Don't you think that curiosity is the core of purpose? If you're not curious about life, if you're not curious about others, curious about something beyond yourself, isn't that the core of purpose? And I said, it absolutely is. That purpose or curiosity energizes you, and other things might drain you. So what do you cry about? What do you sing about? What do you really care about? What are you curious about? If you use your gifts on things that you feel passionate about or that you're curious about, now you're living purposefully. So follow your fascinations, whatever they are. My fascinations have been with aging. When I saw my father die 2 years after retiring and saw all the research on so many people that did so poorly with the retirement transition, I decided that I would do a deep dive, which I've now done for a long time. And this new book is kind of the summation of my work on aging. And my fascination is with aging and vital aging and purposeful aging. And so, if you look at what did you want to be when you grew up and how did that turn out? And what are your fascinations today? What are you willing to let go of? You don't want to live life in the rearview mirror, looking at the past. You want to live life looking at the future and following your fascinations in many ways. Finally, sign 3. Sign number 3 is, what are you willing to sacrifice for? Now, that's really a biggie, because sacrifice means, what are you willing to practice? What are you willing to study? What are you willing to master? What are you willing to give up in order to get what you want or what you think you need to do to live a happy life? I was doing a program, and there was a man sitting in the front row. It was a program on purposeful aging, and a younger man sitting in the front row. And during the break, I said to him, I said, "You're a doctor. What do you do?" And he said, "Well, I'm the head of primary medicine for the astronauts and their families at the Johnson Space Center." I went, "Oh, really? What are you doing here? You don't look old enough to be retiring." He said, "I'm here to figure out how to coach people who are leaving the space program after being astronauts. And I said, is that a big deal? And he looked at me and he didn't smile. And he said, Richard, what would you do in the next phase of your life? You know, you're asking me, who do you want to be when you grow old? Well, what would you do in the next phase of your life if you'd walked on the moon in the first half? And I went, whoa, and he said, I said, is that a big problem? He said, for all of us, it's a problem making a transition from who we've been to what's next. And how to go about that is really what ILI is all about in some meaningful, deep ways. I'm learning a lot from Tom and his colleagues, and they're learning, and we're together learning. But the astronauts, everyone, and there's been, I think, almost 500 that have been in space. 12 have walked on the moon, etc. Almost all of them have been experienced what they call the overview effect. When you get into space and you look back at the planet, Earth, and you look at it with no boundaries, all of a sudden, and its fragility as it hangs out there in black space, all of a sudden you start to look at what's the point, what's the purpose, what's my contribution when I go back. So the goal was to go into space or to walk on the moon, but when they came back, almost everyone had a new purpose, to make a difference, to somehow make a deeper contribution to that planet in some ways. So the questions about what am I willing to sacrifice, there are three questions. First one is, what do you stand for? What do you stand for? What's your credo? If you're a leader or a human being, I created something I called my incomplete manifesto for purpose. My incomplete manifesto for purpose. 10 points about what I've learned and what I stand for and what I believe about purpose. And the starting point is that God created us for a reason. We all have a reason for being here. And that formula is part of the guide to help us figure out what we stand for. What's your credo? What's your manifesto? I called mine incomplete, by the way, because I'm still a learner. And I think the future belongs to the learners, not the knowers. I know things, but I'm learning way more. And that's why I love being a senior fellow at Notre Dame, because I get to be both a learner and perhaps a knower. Second question is, what won't I stand for? What am I willing to say no to? No is a complete sentence. As we get older, hopefully we learn to master the decline. We learn to start to say no to certain things that we don't stand for, that we don't believe in. And I advocate that we've got a lot of things on our to-do list, but I think you might consider a stop doing list. What do I need to stop doing so I can live the life that I want and need to live in the next phase of life? And the third question is, who stands with me? I would, as a coach for many years, I wouldn't coach people unless they had a sounding board. A sounding board like your kitchen cabinet, the people you sit around the fire with, the people who you can be totally transparent, the people who care versus cure you, the people who are interested versus trying always to be interesting. And so the whole business of having a sounding board helps us to really ask and answer the big questions. Isolation is fatal. Going it alone, we've certainly learned this in the pandemic, that isolation is fatal, but we need at least one committed listener on our sounding board. I would say you need a wise elder, a wise younger, and a committed listener on your sounding board, but that we can talk more about that later. Finally, choose your path. Choose your path. Here are two quick practices, and now I'll turn it back to Tom here to see if we have some questions. Choose your path. Here are two simple practices, because I said that purpose is a verb, and it's a morning practice and an evening practice. The morning practice is finding meaning in the morning. First thing when you wake up, before reaching for your cell phone or doing anything else, take 3 steps. Step one is pause. Pause means don't do anything, no phone. Step two, take 3 deep breaths. That's a centering device, to take 3 deep breaths to remind yourself to go within. And the third thing is ask yourself, why? Why do I get up this morning? How can I make a difference today in just one person's life? I do this every single morning, and I've been doing this for decades. My goal, not just to unlock purpose and write books about it, my goal is to make a difference in at least one person's life every single day as long as I live. There are 1,441 purpose moments in a day. 1,441 moments, much less, of course, if you take sleep off and things like that. But we can find and set our intention to live purposefully first thing every morning. Second thing is to stay on your path. That's the next slide. And that is an evening practice. Every evening, put a Post-it on your mirror. I have a Post-it right here, a little pink Post-it, and it says on it, grow and give. And what I would request that you try is to take a Post-it and write the words grow and give on it and put it on your mirror. And in the morning, you can look at it, but and ask yourself, how am I going to grow and give this morning? As you're brushing your teeth, as you're getting ready to go out and do whatever you're doing that day, remind yourself of your DNA here to grow and give as a human being. And secondly, before you go to bed at night, as you're brushing your teeth or before you turn out the light, hold yourself accountable. Did I grow today? How did I grow? What did I learn? And did I give? And so grow and give, that is, those are 2 simple default practices. So my purpose is to help others unlock theirs. I hope that this helped you a little bit to step back and look at the big picture. And that the reminder is that purpose is a choice. Purpose is an aim, a direction we want our life to take. And purpose is a verb, it's an action. And so thank you so much for listening. It's always a gift. Tom, I'll turn it back to you now. Thank you.
Richard, you clearly drew out some great questions from our viewers that they've submitted. So thank you to those that have submitted the questions. And if you have a question you haven't submitted yet, you can still do it via the form that you can access through the Zoom chat. As you can imagine, there are more questions that we can get to, but we'll do our best to cover as many topics as possible. And the way this will work is I'll say your name and location and then read your question. And if Richard wants to engage further, you'll be asked to be unmuted by the host. So our first question comes from Peter in Elizabeth City. Could you discuss fear, the fear of failure and the fear of success? I think that is my biggest leadership impediment. Thank you.
Fear. There's something today called post-traumatic growth. You know, you've heard of post-traumatic stress, but post-traumatic growth can we grow through a pandemic, for example? Can we grow through situations like Viktor Frankl was in? And the answer is yes, but we need practices to do that. We need to activate. And the way to get through, and so if you look at fear or you look at PTG, post-traumatic growth, as kind of a bell-shaped curve. Coming out of the pandemic, there will be some people on the left side of the curve that'll be kind of hopelessly stuck in certain ways, fearful and stuck. A great majority will be in the middle, they'll bounce back at some time, but it'll take time and resilience in certain ways. And the third smaller group is people who are able to overcome their fear. And what Frankl would say is the way to overcome fear is to nose into it by giving, not by, and so fear is going to rest there on your shoulder. But when you step out and give to others, like people who are depressed, if you get them out doing something for the sake of others, their depression seems to go down in certain ways. So I think that why you lead determines how well you lead. And the research on this is fairly clear. And so the why is, why do I do what I do? And you answer that question by actually doing something for others. So not an easy silver bullet answer, Peter, but that's my answer.
So a tune from Woodbury first of all, says thank you for your inspiring talk, and he's in awe that to hear that you're part of the Harvard Grant study. He's curious at the same time as to where did the seed of this conviction for purpose come from?
For me personally,
For you personally, yes.
yeah. From early in life, kind of being a quiet, introverted type, my father, who was a banker, his calling really was to be an Episcopal priest. That's what he really wanted to be. But he was a banker and an immigrant who, had made a living in a tough time, but he used to bring people home to our house in St. Paul, Minnesota, who were of all walks of life, and coach them and listen to them. I'd say mostly listen to them and care for them in certain ways. And he used to make me sit on the step and listen. And of course, that was not something I wanted to be out playing hockey or doing something else. But he said, every person puts their pants on one leg at a time. We've all had some aphorisms like that, and are stuck in certain ways. And I want you to know that and care for people that way. So I learned the seed was planted back then. But then in graduate school, studying psychology, listening to people, I was always a listener. And then fortuitous encounters with people like Viktor Frankl. I met a man named Abraham Maslow the year before he died. Many people know the Maslow hierarchy. And Maslow and Frankl used to argue all the time. They were at odds with each other because Maslow said the top of the hierarchy is self-actualization. And Frankl said, no, it's self-transcendence. It's about others. At the end of Maslow's life, he agreed. They came to terms. And after he died, so the point is that I had fortuitous encounters with people along the way who really were game changers for me. Who are your fortuitous encounters that are game changers? And are you one for others?
So the next question is, I think, a really relevant question in this environment. It comes from Marilyn and Del Mar of New York. And it's relevant, I think, because of the mental health crisis we all know that's emerged in the pandemic. And the question is, does lack of purpose lead to depression, or does depression lead to feeling purposeless?
As you can tell from my pause, I don't know. Everybody's an experiment of one, so I don't do drive-by coaching. And it depends on the person and their circumstance, their health, their background, their story, basically. And a guy named Richard Powers, a novelist, said that the best arguments in the world won't change a person's mind. The only thing that can do that is a good story. And we all have a story about how we got to be the way we are. And so to look at that story, I think lack of purpose, meaninglessness, is something that in my new book, I have a whole chapter called about the late life crisis. And what I find in another chapter, just to commercialize the book, I guess, but another chapter is, am I living a default life? Am I living a default life? And I find that many people kind of live on default. And I'm very interested on the Notre Dame campus. How many people are majoring in what they're majoring in, or kind of down the default life because their parents said that and they don't really know who or what. And even if they graduate, they may not know, and they may be living a default life until even midlife. And then they realize, I didn't choose this, it chose me. And that can be depressing, or it can be an existential later life crisis in certain ways, which then can be recalibrated or reimagined for the next phase of life or not. And the happiness research, when you look at the Harvard study and the other studies of adult development, show that the two happiest times of life are the transition from, I'll call it the 20s to the 30s, basically, and late life. We always think of late life as a decline, and what we found in our science and the science out there is that the inspired life folks, for example, this could be, hopefully will be, one of the happiest times of their life and one of the big learning times in life. So it's a great question. I probably rambled around on it a bit, but I think we're all an experiment of one.
So Richard, the next question comes from Scott in Phoenix, who's a friend of Jim Leider, and he wants to know your thoughts on how full engagement and best energy management are achieved. Are you familiar with those concepts?
I am, and I'm familiar with Jim Leider. In fact, we went to the same graduate school.
Nice.
And so full engagement and the napkin test are totally in sync. If you go back and you look at that slide, it said follow the flow. Full engagement is about following the flow, using your gifts on things you care about in environments that fit your values. And in the career research, the number one knockout factor is values. People could have, for example, a great job using the gifts they love on things they care about. But if they're in an environment that doesn't fit and their boss or their teammates or their culture is not a good one for them, they're going to die from the inside out. I call it rust out. There's a lot about burnout, but there's also rust out. Burnout, overdoing, rust out, underbeing. Underbeing can really take its toll as well as burnout in many ways. So I love Jim Leider's work, the full engagement writing he's done, and the work he's done is fantastic.
So it's a perfect segue to the next question from Lisa in Ireland, who asks if you could provide a reading list to this presentation beyond, of course, Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which you talked about earlier, but do you have some other books that you recommend?
Well, it depends on your stage and age of life and your circumstances, but I would read The Power of Full Engagement. That would be a great book if you're interested in that. Some of you have heard of Parker Palmer, and I think one of the books that is a kind of a classic, Let Your Life Speak, is a classic. And I endorsed his newest book, which just came out, same publisher as mine, Barrett Kohler. But his newest book is called On the Brink of Everything, On the Brink of Everything, which means obviously about the end of life. He's 81, I'm 76. I have a great story. He's endorsed my new book as well, but I have a great story about him. And also, if you want to read a great story, Tom Schreier is in this book as well. I have his story and the ILI story in this book as well. But this new book follows on the Let Your Life Speak and the end of life, on the Brink of Everything books. I think Man's Search for Meaning is a must to read. So those are a few right there.
So one of the questions that comes out here is, what do you recommend for those that you encounter, especially now, that find purpose difficult? It's closely related to, I think, the purpose lead to depression or depression lead to feeling purposeless. But in the pandemic environment, has there been specific advice that you've provided to people to help them to ensure they stay on the path to purpose?
Well, I've written quite a bit about hunkering down and about living in limbo and life in limbo and things like this. And I think I've already suggested a couple things, but one of the key things is to really revisit your why, your gifts, passions, and values. And my website, richardleider.com, has tools. They're all free to do that. And the other thing is isolation is fatal. Don't go it alone. Create a sounding board. And on that sounding board, have a committed listener. And I do a lot of Zoom work these days, and and one of the things that I recommended was to host an ultimate dinner party. Host an ultimate dinner, Zoom dinner party. Who are the people that you would invite to your ultimate dinner party, and discuss uh, a book or discuss a concept and do learning and growing as part of that. You could do it during happy hour. Sometimes I do it, and my friends around the world will toast each other with a glass of wine, and then we'll talk about a big idea, or we'll click in with each other in certain ways. And so grow and give, it's as good as I can get. It's the universal purpose. Grow. Are you growing in this pandemic? Are you going to come out of it on the other side? There is growth after crisis. There can be, but it's a practice. And I met the happiest man in the, I had lunch with the happiest man in the world a while back. His name is Matthew Ricard, if you Google him. He's a Buddhist monk and a translator for the Dalai Lama. He's actually from Paris. And early in his career, in his late 20s, he was actually a biochemist, a PhD biochemist coming from a very prestigious family in Europe, in France. And he went on a spiritual odyssey to India, and he never came back, or he came back to visit, but he stayed there in terms of his learning. And he's one of the world's experts on altruism, which is purpose, and the science of purpose, which I touched on very briefly. And he's written a book called Happiness, one of the books I would recommend, actually, now that I think about it. It's just called Happiness by Matthew Ricard. But I happen to be a senior fellow also in the medical school at the University of Minnesota. And being a senior fellow, we bring in speakers, and Matthew Ricard was one of them. So they said, you're a senior, take him to lunch and then introduce him to thousands of people. And so I did. And so picture this, we're going to lunch. He's in his Buddhist robes and his head shaved, etc. I'm like this. We're waiting for a table at a small little restaurant near the University of Minnesota campus. And I turned to Matthew and I said, how do you get to be the happiest man in the world? And he turned to me and smiled, and he said only one word: practice. And I said, you got to give me a little more to go on here. I've got to introduce you to thousands of people. How do you? And he said, no, it's practice. The reason he's the happiest man in the world, by the way, is in those neurology labs, those neuroscience labs. When they measure the brain waves, they put on what they call the God helmet that measures all of the things going on here. He was able to light up the pleasure center in the brain, in the hippocampus, and that more than even the Dalai Lama, more than anybody they'd ever measured before. Therefore, they call him, the journalist, the happiest man in the world. But my point is practice. Get up every day and have a practice to give, to grow and give.
So you bring to mind so many different things that you and I have talked about, Richard. And I love the fact you mentioned Parker Palmer's book, because his word for your reference to the kitchen cabinet or the personal board of directors is the clearness committee, as you know, right? So
right.
I'd endorse that book. I think it's another great validation of the work that you do. The last question I think we'll have a chance to get to before I have a few comments to make here at the end is, the reason you get up in the morning, the why, can it be different on different days, or should it be constant? Should it be the same, or how does it evolve?
The constant is that it's always about giving. It's always about sharing, somehow making a small contribution to others. It's like Viktor Frankl said, don't ask what my purpose is today. Ask, what is life asking of me now in this moment? And so it's about living purposefully, not having a purpose. It's about being purposeful, activating that verb, that, and it can be consistent like a mantra. For me, unlocking, making a difference in one person's life today, I start to look out at my calendar mentally. What are the purpose moments this day? Not the ones I'm getting paid to do or that I have to do, but where I can stop in a parking lot and give a kind word, or a hug. It used to be. Now it could be a call to somebody or an email or some kind of touch where I'm doing something beyond what's expected in that moment. And all of a sudden I find that I'm not filling time. It's become fulfilling time. It's a fulfilling day when I make that difference. And so I start to look for purpose moments, more than one, and it makes my life work. So that at the end of my life, my legacy is going to be on purpose every day.
Well, Richard, thank you again for this wonderful session. I always learn so much when I have the opportunity to listen to you. And I really appreciate you taking the time today. Ever since we were introduced a few years ago, it's been really clear to me that your work and your mission align so beautifully with what we're doing here at the Inspired Leadership Initiative at Notre Dame. And your continuing work with us and our last guest, Father Dan, will be really powerful. And I look forward also to your new book, What Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old, which you were kind enough to mention. It has a chapter on me, and I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Father Dan, by the way, Father Dan and I have a podcast series coming out next year. So just stay tuned for that. But we've been, I think we've done 8 or 9 or 10 podcasts, and so that's been a huge growth curve for me. So thanks to him and thanks to you for that.
Yes, that will be wonderful as well. So I think there'll be a lot of really wonderful continuing opportunities for engagement with you, Richard. And I want to also thank our guests heartily for participating in this entire fall season of inspiring conversations, leading people in an ever-changing world. It's really been a pleasure for all of us to connect with you over the past few months. And we do plan to launch a second season of Inspiring Conversations in the spring semester. And there'll be more information on that coming here over the year end. And as a final reminder, I just want to let you all know that the series is, of course, kind of led by us here at the Inspired Leadership Initiative. It is that one-year on-campus program for accomplished leaders who have completed their traditional careers. And we are accepting applications. Richard, you were so kind as to advocate what we're doing, but we're accepting applications through the end of May 2021. You can learn more about the program and apply by visiting ili.nd.edu. And finally, I just want to wish all of you a blessed and wonderful holiday season, and I look forward to seeing you next year. Thanks again, Richard.
Thank you, Tom.